He's the voice that built the biggest podcast in the world, the man who turned cage fighting into primetime entertainment, and the guy who went from being a broke kid in Newark, New Jersey to owning mansions, million-dollar cars, and a net worth that rivals Hollywood's elite. Here's a peek inside the luxurious lifestyle of Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan was born on August 11th, 1967 in Newark, New Jersey. His early years weren't picture perfect. Rogan has openly talked about how domestic violence was part of the household, and how by the time he was 7 years old, his parents divorced, and from that time, he went no contact with his dad. After that, Joe and his mother relocated to San Francisco, California for a few years, and eventually settled in Gainesville, Florida. By the time Joe was hitting his teenage years, they had settled in Newton Upper Falls, Massachusetts. As Rogan himself has said, he grew up terrified of being a loser. That's the reason Rogan got into martial arts. At the age of 14, Rogan walked into his first karate class, and from that moment on, he was hooked. After a few years, he shifted to Taekwondo, and that's where he truly made his mark. By the time he was 19, Rogan wasn't just competing, he was dominating. He became the Massachusetts full contact Taekwondo champion, and held that title for 4 consecutive years. Even more impressive, he won the US Open Championship in the lightweight division, proving that discipline could make anyone great. But here's where it gets interesting. Rogan did not go on to become a global star, but he wanted to be a fighter, maybe even go pro. But concussions and injuries cut his dream short, and that's when he got into another entirely different arena, comedy. You see, his friends had noticed something in him. He had a way with words, and he was naturally funny, so they encouraged him to get into stand-up comedy, and Rogan eventually took their advice. And in August 1988, he stepped on stage at a Boston comedy club for the very first time, and something clicked. Soon he was grinding through open mic nights across Boston, sometimes hitting multiple clubs in a single night. During this period, Rogan met manager Jeff Sussman, who saw potential in the hungry young comic, and that acquaintance with Jeff Sussman would prove pivotal in his comedy career. It gave Rogan industry guidance, connections, but perhaps most important of all, someone already in the industry who believed in his talent. But his first big break did not come on a stage, but on TV. In 1994, Rogan landed a role on the MTV comedy show Half Hour Comedy Hour, and soon after, he was cast in the sitcom Hardball. But the real spotlight came when he got a recurring role as Joe Gorelli, the handyman on NBC's hit show News Radio in 1995. That role didn't just put his face on millions of screens, but also cemented him as a legitimate actor and comedian with staying power. His role on News Radio gave him steady exposure, but Rogan never saw himself as just a sitcom actor. Even while shooting the show, he continued to perform stand-up comedy at night in comedy clubs. Stand-up was where his heart was at. Then came a twist of fate that would permanently change his trajectory. Rogan had always been obsessed with martial arts, even after leaving competition. In 1997, he attended a UFC event with friends. Back then, the UFC wasn't the global powerhouse it is today. It was raw and often dismissed as human cockfighting, but Rogan loved it. His deep knowledge of fighting caught the attention of UFC officials, and soon he was offered a gig doing post-fight interviews. At first, Rogan worked those early UFC events for free. In exchange, he just wanted front row tickets to the fights. After a few years, Rogan stepped away, but in 2001, Dana White took over as UFC president, and by 2002, he convinced Rogan to come back, but this time as a color commentator alongside Mike Goldberg. That's when everything changed. Rogan's commentary wasn't just analysis. He made the audience feel part of the game. He could break down a Brazilian jiu-jitsu sweep, a Muay Thai clinch, or a knockout combo in real time. Over the years, Rogan's voice became inseparable from the UFC itself. From legendary knockouts by Anderson Silva to Conor McGregor's meteoric rise, Rogan was there, screaming into the mic, giving fans real insights. The UFC commentary was more than just a side gig. It was a passion project that stretched for more than 20 years. Even after his podcast turned him into one of the richest media figures in the world, Rogan never walked away from the UFC. In 2016, he announced he would no longer travel internationally for UFC events. He limited himself mostly to major US pay-per-view events. We are talking about the biggest fights in Las Vegas, New York, or other US arenas. Now, Rogan didn't stop at commentatorship. In 2001, NBC came calling with a very different kind of opportunity, Fear Factor. The show ran for 6 seasons, and Rogan became a household name. For the first time, mainstream America became familiar with Joe Rogan. But even with all this success, Rogan felt that something was missing. See, television had rules, and networks perks had sensors. The UFC commentator gig was amazing, but it wasn't his. Rogan wanted a space where he could talk about anything, from comedy, fighting, politics, philosophy, even marijuana and psychedelics, with no one telling him to tone it down. And that became a reality in December 2009, sitting in front of a webcam with his friend Brian Redban, his first podcast experience, which he casually called the Joe Rogan experience. Over time, he started inviting comedians, fighters, scientists, authors, and controversial thinkers, and he quickly gained a following. In 2020, everything changed. Spotify came knocking with a $200 million licensing deal that shook the entire media industry. Overnight, the Joe Rogan Experience became the flagship podcast of the world's biggest audio platform. And then, in 2024, Spotify doubled down, renewing his deal for a jaw-dropping $250 million. And this time, Rogan regained the freedom to distribute on other platforms as well. As we are speaking, Rogan's fortune is valued anywhere between $200 million and $250 million. And he's not just sitting on that money, he's investing it into the kind of lifestyle that screams independence, privacy, and luxury. Which brings us to the next topic, his real estate. Rogan has owned multiple mansions, each one representing a different chapter of his life. For years, his home base was a sleek $5 million estate in Bell Canyon, California, tucked away in the hills outside Los Angeles. It had the pool, views, and the space for a home gym. Everything you'd expect from a Hollywood celebrity. By 2020, Rogan moved into a mansion even bigger. That year, he stunned fans by selling his California mansion and moving his entire life to Austin, Texas. For a jaw-dropping $14 million, Rogan bought a mega mansion by Lake Austin. We're talking over 10,000 square feet of living space and luxury amenities built for both family and business. The kind of place where Rogan can raise his daughters in privacy, but also host A-list podcast guests in true style. If you think his mansions are impressive, wait until you hear about his car collection. One thing about Rogan, he's a certified gearhead with one of the most interesting car collections out there. From muscle cars, custom restomods, and futuristic machines, Rogan's car collection is to die for. First up is the 1965 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray, rebuilt from the ground up. This restomod breathes with modern tech under a classic skin. Packing a monstrous LS1 V8 engine with 425 horsepower, this Stingray blends vintage beauty with modern savagery. Then comes the Porsche 911 GT3 RS, tuned by Sharkworks. Sitting on 450 horsepower, stripped for weight, and designed for the track, this GT3 RS is a razor blade on wheels. But if there's one car in his collection that feels like Joe Rogan in vehicle form, it's the 1969 Chevrolet Camaro. Painted in pure jet black, this thing looks like it rolled straight out of a muscle car fever dream. Beneath that hood, a modern LS7 V8 pushing over 600 horsepower. It's aggressive, brutal, and uncompromising. He also has the Ford Raptor Velociraptor, a pickup truck transformed into a monster by Hennessy Performance. Imagine a standard Raptor, already a deadly powerhouse, then crank it up to 600 horsepower. And finally, the future. Rogan's Tesla Model S Plaid, tuned by Unplugged Performance Apex. This is the fastest car he owns, hands down. It has 1,020 horsepower and can reach 60 miles per hour in under 2 seconds. His most prized possession isn't parked in his garage. It's his family. Rogan married Jessica Ditzel in 2009, a former cocktail waitress who has been his rock through fame. Together they have 2 daughters, and Rogan also became stepfather to Jessica's daughter from a previous relationship, making him the proud dad of 3. Now here's the part that surprises people. Despite being one of the loudest voices on the internet, Rogan keeps his family life almost entirely off the radar. No paparazzi parades or flashy interviews. He has stressed many times that shielding his children from the public eye is non-negotiable for him. And there you have it, the man who asks the questions that others avoid. A man who is after his full potential. If you have enjoyed our content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button.